The howling started just after sunset, when the shadows stretched long across the high mountain meadow, and Caroline Reeves realized she had made a terrible mistake bringing the flock this far north without her father. She stood among 300 bleating sheep, her Winchester rifle clutched in both hands, watching the tree line where yellow eyes had begun to gleam in the fading light of September 1883. The wolves had found them, and there were at least 6 by her count, maybe more hidden in the pine forest that surrounded this isolated grazing land 15 miles outside Breckenridge, Colorado. Her father had broken his leg 3 weeks ago when his horse spooked near a rattlesnake den, and the sheep could not wait for his recovery. The high country grass would be gone soon, buried under the first heavy snows that came early to these mountains at nearly 10,000 feet elevation. Caroline had argued that she could handle the drive alone, that she had been herding sheep since she was 12 years old and knew these mountains as well as anyone. Her mother had protested, but her father had looked at their dwindling supplies and the sheep that needed fattening before winter and had reluctantly agreed. Now, at 22 years old, Caroline wondered if her confidence had been foolish pride that would get her killed. The lead wolf stepped from the shadows, a massive gray beast with scarred shoulders and a gaze that held no fear of humans. Caroline raised her rifle, sighting down the barrel, but her hands trembled slightly. She had shot wolves before, but never alone, never surrounded, never with night falling fast and no help within miles. The sheep sensed the predators and pressed closer together, their panicked bleating filling the air with desperate sound. "Get back!" Caroline shouted, firing a shot over the wolf's head. The crack of the rifle echoed across the meadow, and the wolf paused but did not retreat. Instead, 2 more emerged from the tree line to its left, and Caroline's heart hammered against her ribs. She could not watch all directions at once. The wolves knew it too. She fired again, this time aiming for the ground near the lead wolf's feet. Dirt exploded upward, and the animal finally backed up several paces, but its eyes never left the flock. Caroline knew what would happen next. They would wait for full darkness, then attack from multiple sides. She could maybe drop 1 or 2, but the others would scatter the sheep and pick them off through the night. By morning, dozens would be dead or lost in the wilderness, and her family's livelihood would be destroyed. The sound of hoofbeats made her spin around, nearly pulling the trigger in her panic. A rider emerged from the southern trail, moving fast across the meadow on a paint horse that kicked up clods of earth. Caroline kept her rifle raised, not sure if this new arrival meant rescue or a different kind of danger. A woman alone in the high country was vulnerable to more than just wolves. The rider pulled up 20 feet away, and Caroline saw he was a cowboy, lean and tall in the saddle, wearing a dusty brown hat and a long duster coat that had seen better days. His face was shadowed, but his voice carried clearly across the space between them. "No one should face danger solo," he said, swinging down from his horse with practiced ease. He had a rifle in his saddle scabbard and a revolver on his hip. "Especially not with a pack this size. I have been tracking them for 2 days." "Who are you?" Caroline demanded, not lowering her weapon. She had heard stories of men who pretended to help lone travelers only to rob them. "Quinton York," he said, pulling his rifle free and moving to stand beside her without waiting for permission. "I work for the Triple Creek Ranch east of here. Lost 12 head of cattle to this pack last week, and the boss sent me to deal with them." He glanced at her, and even in the dying light she could see his eyes were a striking blue-gray, like storm clouds over the peaks. "You are the Reeves girl, are you not? Your father bought supplies from us last spring." Caroline nodded slowly, some of her tension easing. She remembered her father mentioning the York family, cowboys who had worked various ranches throughout Summit County for years. "Caroline Reeves," she said, "my father is injured. I had to bring the flock up alone." "I figured something like that when I saw the wolves circling," Quinton said. He was scanning the tree line now, counting targets. "They have been following me, staying just out of rifle range. Smart pack. Old Alpha knows humans mean trouble." The lead wolf growled, a sound that rolled across the meadow like distant thunder. 3 more wolves appeared from the eastern side, completing their encirclement. Caroline counted 9 now, more than she had initially thought. "We cannot fight them all off," she said, hating how her voice wavered. "No," Quinton agreed, "but we can make them think twice about the cost." He moved closer, positioning himself so they stood back to back with the flock pressed around their legs. "When they charge, aim for the leaders. The others will break if we drop the dominant ones. Wolves are survivors. They will not risk themselves for a meal if it looks too expensive." Caroline had never stood this close to a man who was not family. She could feel the warmth radiating from his back through their coats, could smell leather and horse and pine smoke on him. Her pulse was racing, but she was not sure anymore if it was only from fear of the wolves. "On my count," Quinton said quietly. 1, 2. The wolves charged before he reached 3. They came from 4 directions simultaneously, gray and black shapes hurtling across the grass with terrifying speed. Caroline fired at the lead wolf, her shot true despite her hammering heart. The animal went down with a yelp, tumbling head over tail. Behind her, Quinton's rifle cracked twice in rapid succession, and she heard heavy bodies hit the ground. "Left side," Quinton shouted, and Caroline swung her rifle around, firing at a wolf that had circled wide. She missed, fired again, and this time the animal stumbled and fell back. The sheep were screaming now, a sound she had never heard them make before, pressing so tightly against her legs that she nearly fell. Quinton fired 3 more times, the reports deafening in the twilight. Another wolf fell, and then suddenly the attack broke. The remaining wolves melted back into the shadows, leaving 4 of their pack dead or dying in the meadow grass. Caroline stood frozen, her rifle still raised, unable to believe it was over so quickly. "Reload," Quinton said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline that must be coursing through him. "They might try again." Caroline's hands shook so badly she nearly dropped her ammunition, but she managed to reload the Winchester with practiced motions learned through years of hunting. Quinton was doing the same, his movements economical and sure. They waited as full darkness fell, but the yellow eyes had vanished from the tree line. "They have learned their lesson," Quinton said finally, lowering his rifle. "Lost too many for this to be worth it. They will find easier prey." Caroline's legs suddenly felt weak, and she sat down hard on the grass, her rifle across her knees. The fear she had been holding back crashed over her in a wave that left her breathless. "I thought I was going to die," she whispered. "I thought they would kill me and scatter the flock and my family would lose everything." Quinton knelt beside her, his face concerned in the starlight that had begun to emerge overhead. "But you did not die," he said gently. "You stood your ground and fought back. That took real courage." "I was terrified," Caroline admitted. "Courage is not the absence of fear," Quinton said. "It is doing what needs doing despite the fear. You would have fought them alone if I had not arrived, would you not?" Caroline nodded. She would have fought until her ammunition ran out or the wolves dragged her down. There had been no other choice. "That is courage," Quinton said simply. He stood and offered her his hand. "Come on. We need to get the flock settled and build up a fire. The wolves will not come near a good blaze, and we both need coffee after that." Caroline took his hand, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength in his grip as he pulled her to her feet. She was tall for a woman, nearly 5 feet 8 inches, but Quinton was taller still, perhaps 6 feet even. "You do not need to stay," she said, though she desperately hoped he would. "You killed the wolves you came for. And leave you alone out here." Quinton shook his head. "No, madam. I will see you and this flock safely back to your father's ranch. Should take us 2 days of driving if the weather holds. That sits right with you." Relief flooded through Caroline so powerfully she felt dizzy. "Yes," she managed. "Thank you." They spent the next hour settling the sheep, checking for injuries and calming the most panicked animals. Caroline had brought minimal supplies, planning to camp rough for the 3 days she expected to be gone. Quinton had a proper bedroll and camp gear, including a coffee pot and actual coffee beans, luxuries Caroline's family could rarely afford. They built their fire in a sheltered spot near a stream, with the sheep bedded down in a tight group nearby. The flames pushed back the darkness, and Caroline finally began to relax as she sipped the strong, hot coffee Quinton had brewed. It tasted better than anything she had drunk in months. "Tell me about your family," Quinton said, sitting across the fire from her. He had removed his hat, and she could see his face clearly now. He was handsome in a weathered way, probably close to her age, with dark hair and strong features marked by sun and wind. "Your father mentioned he came out here from Missouri, Illinois," Caroline corrected. "We came west in 1873, right after the silver strike started bringing people to these mountains. My father thought he would make his fortune in the mines, but he learned quickly that mining is brutal work with poor pay. He bought a small ranch instead and started raising sheep." She wrapped her hands around the tin cup, savoring its warmth. "We have 200 acres in the valley below Breckenridge, good grazing in summer, though winters are hard. My mother and 2 younger brothers help with the flock." "And you?" Quinton asked. "You seem more comfortable out here than most women I have known." Caroline bristled slightly. "Because I can handle a rifle and drive sheep." Quinton held up his hands. "I meant that as a compliment. Most people, men or women, would have panicked when that pack closed in. You kept your head." "That is rare." Caroline relaxed again, feeling foolish for her defensiveness. "I have always preferred the outdoors to housework," she admitted. "My mother despairs of me ever becoming a proper lady. She wants me to find a husband, settle down, have babies. But most of the men in Breckenridge are miners or drifters, and none of them." She trailed off, not sure how to explain that none of the men she had met had ever made her feel anything beyond mild indifference. "None of them what?" Quinton prompted gently. "None of them see me," Caroline said quietly. "They see a woman who should be cooking their meals and mending their clothes. They do not see someone who knows these mountains, who can track game and read weather and keep a flock alive through a hard winter." She looked up at him. "Does that sound prideful?" "It sounds honest," Quinton said. "And for what it is worth, I see you, Caroline Reeves. I see someone brave and capable and strong." He paused, then added, "And I see someone who makes fear look like determination. That is a rare gift." Caroline felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire. No one had ever spoken to her like this before, with such plain respect and admiration. "What about you?" she asked, changing the subject to cover her embarrassment. "You said your family has been in Summit County for years." Quinton nodded, pouring himself more coffee. "My father was a cowboy who drifted through Colorado in the late 60s, working cattle drives and ranch jobs. He met my mother in Denver, married her in 1860, and they settled here when the opportunities started opening up. I was born in 1861, grew up learning cattle and horses. My father died 5 years ago, pneumonia during a bad winter. My mother moved to Golden to live with her sister, and I have been working ranches ever since." "Do you like the work?" Caroline asked. Quinton considered the question, staring into the flames. "I like the independence," he said finally. "I like being out in open country, testing myself against the land and weather. I like honest work where you can see the results of your effort. But ranching for other men means you are never building anything for yourself. You work their cattle, live in their bunkhouse, draw your pay and spend it, then start again next month. Sometimes I wonder what it would be like to have my own place, my own stock. Why do you not try for it?" Caroline asked. "There is still land available in these mountains if you know where to look." "Land takes money," Quinton said. "And a ranch takes more money still. Cattle, horses, equipment, supplies to last through winter. A man working cowboy wages saves slowly." He looked at her across the fire. "Besides, a ranch is not something a man should tackle alone. It takes family, partners, people to share the work and the hardship." There was something in his voice, some note of loneliness that Caroline recognized because she felt it too. She had been alone in most of the ways that mattered for years now, surrounded by family who loved her but did not truly understand her restlessness, her hunger for something more than the narrow life most women lived. "I understand that," she said softly. "Feeling alone even when you are not by yourself." Quinton met her eyes across the fire, and Caroline felt something pass between them, some wordless recognition. They were strangers who had known each other for less than 2 hours, but in that moment, she felt seen in a way she never had before. The fire crackled between them, and a coyote howled somewhere in the distant darkness. The sheep stirred and settled. Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, so bright this far from town that they seemed close enough to touch. "You should sleep," Quinton said finally. "I will take first watch. I will wake you in 4 hours and you can take second watch." "You trust me to keep watch?" Caroline asked, surprised. Most men she knew would never consider letting a woman stand guard. "I trust you with my life," Quinton said simply. "You proved yourself tonight." "Sleep, Caroline. You are safe." She wanted to protest, to insist she could stay awake, but exhaustion was pulling at her like a heavy hand. The adrenaline from the wolf attack had drained away, leaving her hollow and tired. She wrapped herself in her blanket near the fire, using her saddle as a pillow, and watched Quinton through half-closed eyes as he sat alert, his rifle across his knees, guarding the camp. She had never felt safer in her life. Caroline woke to Quinton's gentle hand on her shoulder and the deep darkness that marked the dead of night. She sat up, momentarily disoriented, then remembered where she was. "My turn?" she asked, her voice rough with sleep. "Your turn," Quinton confirmed. Nothing stirred except a fox checking out the flock. "I sent it on its way. Coffee is still warm if you want it." Caroline nodded, taking the rifle he offered and the cup of coffee he poured. Quinton settled into his bedroll on the opposite side of the fire, and within minutes, his breathing had deepened into sleep. Caroline sipped her coffee and watched the night, listening to the small sounds of the wilderness around them. She found herself studying Quinton as he slept, noting the way the firelight played across his features, the strength evident even in rest. He had ridden to her rescue without hesitation, had fought beside her like an equal, had spoken to her with respect and understanding. She barely knew him, but already she felt the stirrings of something she had never experienced before. The night passed slowly. Caroline tended the fire, checked the sheep twice, and sat with her thoughts. When dawn began to gray the eastern sky, she woke Quinton, and they prepared to move the flock. "We will drive them south toward your father's ranch," Quinton said as they saddled their horses. "If we push steady, we can make 10 miles today, camp overnight, then finish the drive tomorrow afternoon." "That work for you?" "Perfect," Caroline said. She had her own horse, a sturdy bay mare named Ginger who had been with the family for 6 years. Together, they began pushing the sheep into motion, working the flock with practiced efficiency. Driving sheep through mountain country was slow work that required patience and vigilance. The animals wanted to stop and graze every few hundred yards, and there were countless ways for them to scatter or injure themselves on the rocky terrain. But Caroline and Quinton worked well together, anticipating each other's movements, covering the weak points in the flock without needing to discuss strategy. As the morning wore on and the sun climbed higher, they talked. Caroline learned that Quinton had 2 sisters, both married and living in California. She told him about her brothers, James, who was 16 and wanted desperately to go east to college, and Thomas, who was 12 and loved the sheep as much as she did. Quinton described the ranch where he worked, a sprawling cattle operation that ran 2,000 head across mountain and valley range. Caroline explained the economics of sheep ranching, the constant struggle to get fair prices from the wool buyers who came through each spring. "The cattle ranchers hate us," she admitted as they stopped at midday to water the flock at a creek. "They say sheep ruin the grazing for cattle, that we are taking over range that should be theirs. Last year, someone cut our fence and scattered the flock. My father spent 3 days rounding them up again." Quinton's face darkened. "That is criminal. Who did it?" "We never proved anything," Caroline said bitterly. "But we suspect it was riders from the Rockland Cattle Company. They have been buying up land around Breckenridge, trying to push out smaller ranchers. They see sheep farmers as easy targets." "The Triple Creek has no quarrel with sheep men," Quinton said firmly. "My boss believes there is room for everyone if people act decent. Cattle and sheep can share range if it is managed right." He paused. "But I know the Rockland outfit. They play rough. You need to be careful, Caroline." The concern in his voice warmed her. "I am always careful," she said, then laughed. "Except when I drive 300 sheep through wolf country alone. That was perhaps not my wisest decision." Quinton smiled, the expression transforming his serious face into something younger and more open. "Well, it led to us meeting, so perhaps not entirely unwise." Caroline felt her heart skip at those words, at the implication behind them. Was he saying he was glad they had met? That he felt this connection too? She wanted to ask but could not find the courage. Instead, she smiled back and said, "I suppose there is that." They drove the sheep through the afternoon, following established trails that wound through pine forests and across high meadows. The September weather held clear and warm, though Caroline knew it could change in an instant this high in the mountains. By late afternoon, they had covered nearly 12 miles, better than Quinton had estimated. "There is a good camping spot about a mile ahead," Caroline said as the sun began its descent toward the western peaks. "A box canyon with water and shelter. My father and I have used it before." They pushed the flock into the canyon as twilight fell, and Caroline showed Quinton where to position their camp for maximum safety. The canyon had only one entrance, which made it easy to guard, and high rock walls that blocked the wind. A small spring-fed pool provided fresh water. As they made camp, the easy partnership they had developed during the day's drive continued. Caroline gathered firewood while Quinton hobbled the horses. Quinton started the fire while Caroline checked the flock for injuries. They worked together to prepare a simple meal of beans and salt pork, passing tools and supplies without needing to ask. "You do this well," Quinton observed as they ate. "Working with someone, I mean. Most people step on each other's toes, getting in the way. You have a natural sense of how to share space and work." Caroline had never thought about it before, but she realized he was right. "I think it is because I pay attention," she said. "I watch what people need, what they are doing." My mother always said I notice too much, that I should focus on my own tasks. But I cannot help it. It is a gift, Quinton said. Awareness like that makes you a good partner. He hesitated, then added, for working. For anything, really. The conversation had turned into something more than casual talk, and Caroline felt the air between them charged with unspoken possibility. The firelight danced across Quinton's face, and she wondered what it would be like to touch him, to be held by someone who saw her as an equal. "Quinton," she began, not sure what she wanted to say, only knowing she needed to acknowledge this thing growing between them. He looked at her, his storm-gray eyes intense. "Caroline, I know we just met. I know I have no right to say this yet. But I need you to know that meeting you has felt like finding something I did not even know I was searching for. You are unlike anyone I have ever known." Caroline's breath caught. "I feel it too," she whispered. "I have never felt this way before. Like I can be completely myself, and that is not only acceptable but valued." Quinton moved around the fire to sit beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "I want to know everything about you," he said quietly. "What you dream about, what you are afraid of, what makes you laugh. I want to hear every story, every thought." "I dream about having my own land," Caroline said, the words spilling out. "A bigger spread than my father's ranch, somewhere I could build something lasting. I dream about raising sheep and horses, about being successful enough that no one could ever push us around. I am afraid of being trapped in a life that feels too small, of wasting whatever potential I might have. I laugh at clever wordplay and at my brother Thomas's terrible jokes, and at the way newborn lambs jump and twist for no reason." Quinton was smiling. "I dream about having a partner to build that life with," he said. "Someone strong and smart who would be a true equal. I am afraid of spending my life working for other men's dreams instead of my own. I laugh at absurdity and at good horses being stubborn, and at the way the world surprises you when you least expect it." They were sitting very close now, and Caroline could feel the warmth of his body, could see the gold flecks in his gray eyes. "This is happening very fast," she said, though she made no move to pull away. "Yes," Quinton agreed. "Does that frighten you?" Caroline considered. By all rights it should frighten her. She had known this man for barely a day, but what she felt was not fear but a rightness, a sense of recognition that went beyond logic. "No," she said honestly, "it does not frighten me. It feels like the most natural thing in the world." Quinton reached up slowly, giving her time to pull back if she wanted, and cupped her face with his hand. His palm was warm and rough with calluses, and Caroline leaned into the touch. "May I kiss you?" he asked, his voice low and rough. "Yes," Caroline breathed, and then his lips were on hers, gentle and searching. She had been kissed twice before, clumsy attempts by boys in Breckenridge who had tasted like whiskey and tobacco and disappointment. This was nothing like those experiences. Quinton kissed her like she was precious, like he was memorizing the moment, and Caroline felt something deep inside her unfold and reach toward him. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Quinton rested his forehead against hers. "I am falling in love with you, Caroline Reeves," he said. "I know it is too soon to say it, but it is the truth." "I am falling in love with you too, Quinton York," Caroline replied, and saying the words out loud made them real, made this connection between them solid and undeniable. "What do we do about it? We finish this drive," Quinton said practically, though his hand had moved to the back of her neck, his fingers tangling gently in her hair. "We get these sheep safely to your father's ranch, then I meet your family properly. I court you the right way, with permission and intention. And if you will have me, I start figuring out how to build the life we both want." Caroline pulled back enough to look into his eyes. "You would give up working cattle to raise sheep with me?" "I would work with hellhounds if it meant being with you," Quinton said, and she could see he meant it. "Besides, I told you, I have no quarrel with sheep. They are just livestock, same as cattle. What matters is the person you are building with, not the type of animal you are raising." They sat together by the fire for hours, talking and occasionally kissing, learning each other in all the ways that mattered. Caroline told him about the time she tracked a missing ewe for 2 days through a blizzard and found it trapped in a ravine with a newborn lamb, both somehow still alive. Quinton told her about breaking a wild Mustang that every other cowboy on the ranch had given up on, earning a horse that would follow him like a dog for the next 8 years, until it died of old age. They shared their fears and hopes, their failures and triumphs, weaving their stories together until the boundaries between them began to blur. When they finally slept, it was in separate bedrolls but close together, their hands clasped between them. Caroline woke several times during the night and saw Quinton watching her with an expression of wonder that made her chest ache with happiness. The next morning dawned clear and cold, with frost sparkling on the grass. They broke camp efficiently, both energized by the possibilities opening before them. The sheep were cooperative, and they made good time driving them south toward the Reeves ranch. As they descended from the high country into the valley where Breckenridge sat, Caroline began to feel nervous. What would her parents think of Quinton? Would they see what she saw in him, or would they think she had lost her mind, falling for a stranger she had known for 2 days? "They will love you," Quinton said, reading her worry. "How could they not? You are their daughter, and if you chose me, they will trust your judgment." "You do not know my mother," Caroline said with a nervous laugh. "She has very specific ideas about courtship and propriety. Spending 2 nights alone with you in the wilderness is going to scandalize her." "Then I will apologize for compromising you and assure her my intentions are completely honorable," Quinton said calmly. "Which they are. I want to marry you, Caroline. I know it is too soon to propose properly, but I want you to know that is where I am heading with this. I am not playing games or passing time. I am serious." Caroline's heart soared. "I am serious too," she said. "I want to build a life with you, Quinton. I want everything we talked about last night." They crested the final ridge, and the Reeves ranch came into view below them. It was modest, a small cabin with a barn and several pens, surrounded by fenced pasture where the rest of the family's sheep grazed. Smoke rose from the cabin chimney, and Caroline could see her mother hanging laundry on a line beside the house. "There," she said, pointing. "That is home." They drove the flock down the valley and into the home pasture, where Thomas saw them coming and ran shouting toward the cabin. Within minutes, the entire family had emerged. Caroline's mother, Martha, was a stout woman with graying hair and a face lined by hard work and mountain weather. Her father, Robert, came hobbling out on crutches, his broken leg splinted and wrapped. James, tall and thin at 16, stood behind them looking curious. Caroline rode ahead, leaving Quinton to manage the flock. She dismounted and embraced her mother, who clutched her tightly. "Thank God," Martha said. "We have been so worried. When you did not come back yesterday, your father wanted to ride out looking for you, broken leg or not." "I am fine, Mother," Caroline assured her, "but I ran into some trouble. Wolf Pack found the flock the first night. If Quinton had not arrived when he did, I would have lost everything." Robert had hobbled closer, his eyes on Quinton, who was efficiently penning the sheep with Thomas's help. "That is Quinton York," he said. "From the Triple Creek Ranch. I know his people. Good family. How did he come to be there?" Caroline explained about the wolf pack that had been harassing both their flocks, about the attack and the fight and Quinton's offer to help her complete the drive. She watched her parents' faces carefully, trying to gauge their reaction. Martha looked troubled, no doubt thinking about propriety and reputation. Robert looked thoughtful. "Well, he has my thanks," Robert said finally. "Those sheep are our livelihood. Losing them would have ruined us." He called out, "York, come here, son. Let me shake your hand properly." Quinton handed the last of the sheep off to Thomas and walked over, removing his hat respectfully. "Mr. Reeves, madam," he said, nodding to Martha. "I am glad I could help. Your daughter showed real courage up there. She would have fought those wolves alone if necessary." "But she did not have to, thanks to you," Robert said, shaking Quinton's hand firmly despite his precarious balance on the crutches. "That is twice you have saved my family. Once by driving off those wolves and once by making sure Caroline got home safely. I am in your debt." "No debt," Quinton said. "I did what anyone decent would do. Besides, I had my own interest in killing those wolves. They have been harassing our cattle for weeks." Martha had been studying Quinton with sharp eyes, and now she turned to Caroline. "You spent 2 nights alone with this man in the wilderness." Caroline lifted her chin. "I did. He was a perfect gentleman, Mother. He kept me safe and brought me home with my reputation intact. If anyone in town wants to gossip, let them. I will not apologize for surviving." "No one is asking you to apologize," Martha said, though her mouth was tight. "But people will talk. You know how they are." "Let them talk," Quinton said quietly but firmly. Everyone turned to look at him. "I realize I am a stranger to you and you have no reason to trust me yet. But I want you to know that my interest in your daughter is honorable and serious. I would like your permission to court her properly. I will do everything right, everything by the book. But I will not have Caroline shamed for an accident of circumstance that was beyond her control." Robert and Martha exchanged a long look, the kind of wordless communication that came from decades of marriage. Finally, Robert nodded slowly. "You have spine, York. I respect that. And Caroline is a good judge of character. If she trusts you, that means something." He paused. "You have my permission to court my daughter. But understand this, she is precious to us. If you hurt her, you will answer to me, broken leg or not." "I would never hurt her," Quinton said, and the conviction in his voice made Martha's expression soften slightly. "She is the finest person I have ever met. I count myself lucky that she is willing to give me a chance." Thomas had been listening to all of this with wide eyes, and now he blurted out, "Are you going to marry my sister, Thomas?" Martha said sharply, but Quinton just smiled. "If she will have me," he said honestly. "But that is getting ahead of ourselves. First comes courting." Caroline felt like her heart might burst from happiness. Her family was giving them a chance. Quinton was staying. They could explore this connection properly, build something real and lasting. "You will stay for supper," Martha said, and it was not quite a question. "It is the least we can do after you brought our daughter home safely. Caroline, come help me prepare the meal. You men can tend to the horses and get those sheep settled." The next few hours passed in a blur of domestic activity. Caroline helped her mother prepare a substantial meal of roasted chicken, potatoes, and biscuits, luxuries the family could not afford often. Martha did not say much as they worked, but Caroline could feel her mother studying her, noting the way her face lit up whenever Quinton's voice drifted in from outside, the way she kept glancing out the window to where he worked alongside her father and brothers. Finally, as Caroline was setting the table, Martha spoke. "You care for him already. I can see it in your face." Caroline considered denying it, then decided on honesty. "I do, Mother. I know it is fast. I know it seems impossible, but I have never felt this way before. He sees me, really sees me for who I am. He does not want to change me or tame me. He admires the parts of me that most people think are faults." Martha sighed, wiping her hands on her apron. "Your father and I knew each other for 3 weeks before we married," she admitted. "My parents thought we were insane, But your father needed a wife to help with his homestead, and I wanted out of the city, so we took a chance on each other. It worked out, but it easily could have gone another way." She turned to face Caroline fully. "What I am saying is, I understand following your heart, but be smart too. Take the time to really know him. Make sure this feeling lasts beyond the first flush of romance." "I will," Caroline promised. "But Mother, I already know in my bones that he is right for me." "I know how that sounds, but it is true." Martha reached out and cupped Caroline's cheek gently. "Then I hope he proves worthy of you, daughter, because you deserve someone who sees your value." Supper was a lively affair. Quinton fit easily into the family dynamic, answering James's questions about working cattle drives and laughing at Thomas's enthusiastic description of his favorite sheep. He praised Martha's cooking sincerely and asked Robert's advice on dealing with difficult terrain when moving livestock. By the time the meal ended, Caroline could see her entire family warming to him. As darkness fell, Quinton prepared to ride back to the Triple Creek Ranch. Caroline walked him out to where his horse waited, grateful for a few minutes alone. "Your family is wonderful," Quinton said, taking both her hands in his. "You are lucky to have them." "They like you," Caroline said. "I can tell. Even my mother, though she will never admit it directly." Quinton smiled. "I will be back in 3 days. I need to report to my boss about the wolves, but then I have some time off coming. I would like to take you into Breckenridge properly if you are willing. Dinner at the hotel restaurant, maybe a walk through town. Let people see us together so there is no question about my intentions." "I would like that," Caroline said softly. Then, feeling bold, she added, "But I will miss you until then." "And I will miss you," Quinton said. He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her in a way that felt both protective and reverent. 3 days will feel like 3 years. But I want to do this right. I want to give you a courtship you can look back on with happiness." Caroline tilted her face up and kissed him, pouring all her feelings into the contact. Quinton responded with matching intensity, one hand tangling in her hair, the other pressed against the small of her back. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. 3 days, Caroline whispered against his lips. "I will count every hour." Quinton mounted his horse reluctantly, looking down at her with such longing that Caroline almost asked him to stay. But he was right to go to do this properly. They had time now. No wolves chasing them, no immediate danger. They could build their relationship with care and intention. "Good night, Caroline Reeves," Quinton said. "Dream of me." "Always," Caroline promised and stood watching until he disappeared into the darkness. The next 3 days were the longest of Caroline's life. She threw herself into ranch work, helping her father despite his protests that she should rest after her ordeal. She repaired fences, checked the sheep obsessively for injuries from the wolf encounter, and rode out to scout the northern pastures for early snow. But through it all, her mind was on Quinton, replaying their conversations, remembering the way his hands felt on her skin, imagining the future they might build together. Her mother watched her with knowing eyes but said nothing. Thomas asked approximately 400 questions about Quinton, most of which Caroline could not answer. James seemed more interested in the wolves than the romance, pestering Caroline for details about the attack until she wanted to scream. On the 3rd day, Caroline spent 2 hours getting ready, a process that usually took her 15 minutes. She bathed carefully, washed and dried her hair until it shone, and put on her best dress, a deep green cotton that her mother had made 2 years ago for church. She owned no jewelry except a simple silver locket that had belonged to her grandmother, but she wore that with pride. When Quinton arrived right on time, riding a different horse and wearing clean clothes and a new hat, Caroline felt her breath catch. He was devastatingly handsome, and the way his face lit up when he saw her made her feel beautiful in a way she never had before. "You are stunning," Quinton said, dismounting and walking toward her slowly, as if afraid she might disappear. "I mean, you are always beautiful, but right now you are absolutely stunning." Caroline felt herself blush. "You look very handsome yourself." Quinton helped her mount Ginger, then swung back up on his own horse. "Shall we go make Breckenridge gossip?" he asked with a grin. The ride into town took 30 minutes, and they talked the entire way, filling each other in on the 3 days they had been apart. Quinton had reported the successful wolf hunt to his boss, who had given him 4 days off as a reward. "I told him I planned to spend that time courting the bravest woman in Colorado," Quinton said. "He laughed and said I had better not mess it up, or he would fire me on principle." Breckenridge was a booming mining town, population hovering around 3,000, with new buildings going up constantly. The streets were busy with miners, merchants, cowboys, and all the people who made their living off the silver that flowed out of the mountains. Caroline usually disliked coming to town, finding it too crowded and noisy, but today it seemed magical, full of possibility. Quinton took her to the Empire Hotel, the finest establishment in town, and they had dinner in the restaurant that occupied the ground floor. The meal was elaborate by Caroline's standards. Steak and potatoes, fresh bread, and actual pie for dessert. But what made it special was the way Quinton looked at her across the table, the way he listened intently to everything she said, the way he made her feel like the most important person in the room. People noticed them, of course. Several miners tipped their hats to Caroline, looking curious about her companion. A few women from the church congregation stared and whispered behind their hands. Caroline ignored them all, focusing entirely on Quinton. After dinner, they walked through town as the sun set, painting the mountains gold and orange and purple. Quinton told her more about his life, about the various ranches he had worked and the places he had seen. Caroline described her dreams in greater detail, talking about breeding programs for sheep, about expanding their grazing range, about maybe even starting a small wool processing operation. "You have really thought this through," Quinton observed as they paused outside the general store. "You have a vision for the future." "I've had years to think about it," Caroline admitted, "lying awake at night, imagining what I would do if I had the resources and freedom to build something of my own. But it always seemed like an impossible dream. Women do not usually run ranches, and my father cannot afford to expand significantly. But 2 people together could do it," Quinton said thoughtfully. "If they pooled their resources and worked as partners. I have money saved, Caroline. Not a fortune, but enough to buy some cattle and maybe lease additional grazing land. Your family has the sheep operation and established buyers for the wool. Between us, we could start building something real." Caroline's heart was racing. "You are talking about marriage." "About truly building a life together." "I am," Quinton confirmed. "I know we have only known each other for a week. I know I should wait months before talking like this. But I also know what I feel, and I know what I see in you. We could be extraordinary together, Caroline. We could build something that lasts, something we are both proud of." "Yes," Caroline breathed, not even hesitating. "Yes to all of it. Yes to building a life together. Yes to marriage when the time is right. Yes to everything." Quinton pulled her into his arms right there on the main street of Breckenridge and kissed her deeply, not caring who saw. Caroline kissed him back with equal passion, feeling like her entire life had been leading to this moment, this person, this perfect rightness. When they finally broke apart, laughing and giddy, they found that a small crowd had gathered. Several people were smiling indulgently, Others looked scandalized, and one old miner actually applauded. Caroline laughed harder, leaning into Quinton's solid warmth, and decided that gossip was a small price to pay for this much happiness. They rode back to the Reeves ranch in the twilight, holding hands whenever the trail allowed their horses to walk close enough. When they arrived, Quinton asked permission to speak to Robert privately, and Caroline's father invited him into the cabin while Caroline waited outside with her heart hammering. 20 minutes later, Quinton emerged looking relieved and happy. Robert followed, leaning on his crutches. "Caroline, come here, please," her father called. Caroline approached nervously. Had something gone wrong? Had her father changed his mind about approving the courtship? "Quinton has asked for my permission to marry you," Robert said without preamble. "I told him yes, with the condition that you wait at least 3 months before actually doing it. I want you to have time to be sure, both of you. This is the rest of your life we are talking about. But if, after 3 months, you still feel the same way, you have my blessing." Caroline threw her arms around her father, crutches and all, nearly knocking him over. "Thank you, Papa, thank you so much," Robert chuckled, patting her back awkwardly. "I just want you to be happy, daughter. Quinton seems like a good man. He has a solid plan for how you two would make a living together, and he clearly adores you. What more could a father ask for?" Martha had come to the door, and she was smiling despite the tears in her eyes. 3 months, she said firmly. "That gives us time to plan a proper wedding. And Quinton, you are welcome here anytime. We might as well get used to having you around." Over the following weeks, Quinton became a regular presence at the Reeves ranch. He would arrive after finishing his work at the Triple Creek, often staying for supper and spending the evening talking with the family before riding back in the darkness. On his days off, he and Caroline would ride out into the mountains together, always with Thomas or James along as a chaperone to satisfy propriety, exploring the high country and talking about their plans. Quinton helped Robert repair the fence that had been cut, reinforcing it so it would not be easily damaged again. He taught Thomas and James better rope handling techniques. He won Martha over completely by fixing the cabin's leaky roof without being asked and complimenting her cooking so sincerely that she blushed like a girl. But it was the time alone with Caroline, or as alone as they could manage with a younger brother trailing behind, that Quinton treasured most. They would ride to remote meadows and talk for hours about everything and nothing. Quinton shared his fears about not being good enough for her, about failing to build the life they had planned. Caroline admitted her own worries about not being a good enough wife, about being too independent and stubborn. "You could never be too independent," Quinton assured her. "That is what I love about you, your strength and determination. I do not want some meek woman who will just follow orders. I want a partner who will challenge me and push me to be better. And I want a man who is not threatened by my capabilities," Caroline replied. "Someone who sees my strength as an asset, not a flaw. You are that person, Quinton. You have been from the moment we met." As autumn deepened into early winter, the 3-month waiting period felt both too long and too short. Caroline was impatient to start their married life, but she also treasured this courtship period, this time of discovery and anticipation. Quinton felt the same way, savoring each moment while eagerly planning their future. They decided to marry in early December, before the heavy snows made travel impossible. The wedding would be small, just family and a few close friends, held at the small church in Breckenridge. Afterward, they would live temporarily at the Reeves ranch while searching for land of their own to lease or purchase. Quinton had given his notice at the Triple Creek ranch, though his boss had been understanding and even generous, giving him a bonus and promising to buy cattle from them once they got their operation established. "You are going to do well," his boss had said. "York, you have always been one of my best hands, but I could see you needed something more. Go build your dream. I will be rooting for you." 2 weeks before the wedding, disaster struck. Caroline and Thomas were checking the northern fence line when they found it cut again, and this time nearly 50 sheep had wandered through onto adjoining land owned by the Rockland Cattle Company. "They are going to claim our sheep destroyed their grazing," Caroline said grimly, helping Thomas drive the animals back onto Reeves' land. "They are going to use this as an excuse to cause trouble." She was right. The next day, 4 Rockland riders showed up at the ranch, led by a hard-faced man named Garrett Mitchell who served as the company's foreman. "Your animals damaged our range," Mitchell announced without preamble. "We are taking 10 head as compensation." Robert, still on crutches but furious, limped out to confront them. "You cut that fence. Everyone knows it. You have been harassing sheep ranchers for months trying to drive us out. I will not pay for your sabotage." Mitchell's hand moved toward his gun. "You calling me a liar, sheep farmer?" Before the situation could escalate further, Quinton came riding in fast, having been working on the southern pastures. He positioned his horse between the Rockland men and the Reeves family. "There is no need for trouble here," he said calmly, though his hand rested near his own revolver. "Mitchell, you know as well as I do that fence was cut deliberately, probably by your men. The Reeves family has done nothing wrong." Mitchell's eyes narrowed. "York, I heard you quit working honest cattle and decided to throw in with sheep lovers. Sad to see a good cowboy go bad." "Nothing bad about raising sheep," Quinton said evenly. "And nothing honest about cutting fences and trying to steal livestock. I suggest you and your men ride out of here before this situation gets worse." For a tense moment, Caroline thought violence was inevitable. The Rockland men outnumbered them, and Mitchell's face was dark with rage. But Quinton sat calm and steady on his horse, projecting confidence that made the other men hesitate. Finally, Mitchell spat in the dirt. "This is not over. Rockland does not forget. You are going to regret choosing the wrong side, York." "The only side I chose is the side of the woman I love and the family I am joining," Quinton replied. "Now get off this land before I report you to the sheriff for trespassing and attempted theft." The Rockland men rode out, but their threats hung heavy in the air. That night, the family had a serious discussion about security. "They will try something else," Robert said grimly. "Maybe burn the barn, maybe scatter the flock. Men like Mitchell do not back down from a challenge." "Then we post guards," Quinton said. "I will sleep in the barn for now. Thomas and James can take shifts watching the flock. We make it clear we are not easy targets." For the next 2 weeks, until the wedding, they lived in a state of watchful tension. Nothing happened, which was somehow worse than an outright attack. Everyone kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. But perhaps the show of resolve had convinced Rockland to leave them alone, at least for now. Or perhaps they were just biding their time. The wedding day dawned cold and clear, with fresh snow on the mountain peaks, but the valley still mostly clear. Caroline woke feeling nervous and excited in equal measure. Today, she would marry Quinton York, and her entire life would change. Martha helped her dress in a new gown they had made together, cream-colored wool with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. Caroline had never worn anything so fine. Martha arranged her hair, pinning it up in a style more elegant than Caroline's usual practical braid. When Caroline looked at herself in the small mirror, she barely recognized the refined woman staring back. "You are beautiful," Martha said, tears spilling down her cheeks. "My little girl, all grown up and getting married." "I am terrified," Caroline admitted. "What if I am not good at being a wife? What if I disappoint him?" Martha took her hands. Listen to me, Caroline. That man worships the ground you walk on. He does not want you to change or become someone different. He wants you exactly as you are. Just be yourself. Work together as partners like you have been doing, and your marriage will be fine. The ceremony was held at noon in the small white church that served Breckenridge's Protestant community. Caroline's nerves melted away the moment she saw Quinton waiting at the altar, looking more handsome than she had ever seen him in a borrowed suit, his face full of love and wonder as he watched her walk down the aisle on her father's arm. The ceremony itself passed in a blur. Caroline heard herself saying the vows, felt Quinton slip a simple gold band onto her finger, and then the minister was pronouncing them husband and wife, and Quinton was kissing her, sealing their union before God and witnesses. The small reception was held at the Empire Hotel, with food and music and dancing. Quinton's mother had made the journey from Golden, a thin woman with kind eyes who embraced Caroline and welcomed her to the family. Several of Quinton's friends from the Triple Creek Ranch attended, along with neighbors and church members who wished the couple well. As Caroline danced with her new husband, she felt a profound sense of rightness. This was where she was meant to be. This man was who she was meant to be with. The journey that had begun with a terrifying wolf attack had led her to the greatest happiness of her life. "I love you, Mrs. York," Quinton murmured in her ear as they swayed to the music. "I love you, Mr. York," Caroline replied, and kissed him while their guests cheered. The first months of married life were an adjustment, though mostly a joyful one. Quinton moved into the small bedroom that had been Caroline's since childhood, and they squeezed into the space together with good humor and growing intimacy. Martha hung a curtain to give them privacy, and the family adjusted to having another adult in the household. Quinton worked alongside Robert, learning the details of sheep ranching he had not known from his cattle experience. He proved a quick study, and his strength and youth were invaluable as Robert's leg healed slowly. Caroline continued doing everything she had always done, but now she had a partner to share the load, someone to strategize with late at night as they lay tangled together in their narrow bed. They began actively searching for land they could lease or purchase. Quinton's savings combined with careful economizing gave them enough capital to start small, but they needed to find the right location. It had to have adequate grazing, water access, and be defensible enough that the Rockland Company could not easily harass them. In February, they found it. An older rancher named Samuel Peterson was retiring and moving to Denver to live with his daughter. He had 160 acres of good land, 5 miles north of the Reeves Ranch, with a small cabin, a barn, and excellent spring water. He offered to lease it to them for 3 years with an option to purchase if they proved successful. "It is perfect," Caroline breathed as she and Quinton walked the property. "We could run 200 sheep here easily, maybe more, and the cabin needs work, but it is sound. We could make this into a real home." "Then let us do it," Quinton said, pulling her close. "Let us start building our dream, Caroline." They signed the lease in March and moved to their new property in April, as soon as the weather allowed. The separation from her family was harder than Caroline expected, but they were only 5 miles away, close enough to visit regularly but far enough to feel like their own establishment. The cabin was tiny, just 2 rooms, but it was theirs. They spent weeks repairing and improving it, working from dawn until dark. Quinton fixed the roof and chinked the walls against drafts. Caroline scrubbed and cleaned, sewed curtains, and created a cozy home from almost nothing. They brought 50 sheep from the Reeves flock as starter stock, animals that Caroline had raised from lambs and knew intimately. Quinton purchased 20 head of young cattle from his former boss, a small start toward a mixed herd, The work was back-breaking and endless. They woke before dawn to tend animals, spent long days maintaining fences and managing grazing, collapsed into bed exhausted each night. But they were doing it together, building something that belonged to them, and that made even the hardest days feel worthwhile. Caroline discovered she was pregnant in June. She had suspected for a few weeks, but had waited to be sure before telling Quinton. When she finally shared the news, he picked her up and spun her around despite her laughing protests. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "We are going to be parents." "Are you happy?" Caroline asked, though his reaction made the question unnecessary. "I am terrified and thrilled and so deeply happy I cannot find words for it," Quinton said. "You are going to be an incredible mother, Caroline. Our child is so lucky." The pregnancy was difficult at times. Morning sickness plagued Caroline for months, and the summer heat made her miserable. But Quinton was attentive and caring, taking on extra work without complaint, making sure she rested when she needed to. Martha visited often, bringing food and supplies and maternal wisdom that Caroline desperately needed. In late summer, disaster nearly struck again. A wildfire started in the mountains above their property, driven by hot winds and drought conditions. Quinton and Caroline worked frantically to move their livestock to safety, driving them south toward the Reeves ranch while smoke filled the sky and ash fell like snow. They lost 10 acres of pasture and part of their northern fence, but the cabin and barn survived, and all their animals made it through safely. "We will rebuild," Quinton said as they surveyed the damage, exhausted and covered in soot. "It could have been so much worse." Caroline leaned against him, one hand on her swollen belly where their child moved and kicked. "Together we can overcome anything," she said. "I truly believe that." The baby came in February of 1884, during a blizzard that trapped them in the cabin for 3 days. Martha had moved in a week earlier to help with the birth, and Quinton paced the small space like a caged animal while Caroline labored. The birth was long and difficult, and there were moments when Caroline thought she might not survive it. But finally, after 18 hours, she held her son in her arms, a red-faced, squalling infant who was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. "What should we name him?" Quinton asked, tears streaming down his face as he held his son for the first time. "Samuel," Caroline said. "After Mr. Peterson, who gave us our start." "Samuel York." Quinton nodded, too overcome with emotion to speak. He held his small family close, Caroline exhausted but radiant, the baby already quieting at his father's touch, and felt a completeness he had never known before. The years that followed were a blur of hard work and slow growth. Samuel grew into a sturdy toddler with his father's gray eyes and his mother's determination. The ranch expanded gradually as they saved money and purchased additional stock. They faced challenges: harsh winters, dry summers, predators, occasional harassment from Rockland riders that never quite escalated into violence. But they faced everything together, partners in every sense of the word. In 1886, their daughter was born, a tiny girl with dark hair and a temper that made them laugh. They named her Grace, for the grace they felt at being given such gifts. 2 years later, another son arrived, Robert, named for Caroline's father, who had passed away the previous winter after his old injury never properly healed. The ranch grew along with their family. By 1890, they ran 500 sheep and 100 head of cattle across 300 acres they now owned outright. They had built a new, larger house, hired 2 seasonal hands to help with the work, and established a reputation for quality livestock. Quinton's prediction had been correct. Together they were extraordinary. On their 7th anniversary, Quinton took Caroline riding up into the mountains, just the two of them, leaving the children with Martha for the night. They rode to the meadow where they had first met, where wolves had once threatened and a stranger had arrived in the gathering dark. "You remember?" Quinton asked as they stood looking at the familiar landscape. "Every moment," Caroline said. "I remember being terrified and trying not to show it. I remember you appearing like some figure from a story, saying that no one should face danger solo. I remember thinking you might be the answer to prayers. I had not even known I was praying." "You saved me too that night," Quinton said. "I had been drifting, working other men's ranches, never finding purpose or meaning. You gave me both. You gave me everything." Caroline turned to face him, this man she had built a life with, who had been her partner through hardships and triumphs, who had given her children and laughter and a love deeper than she had imagined possible. "I would do it all again," she said. "Every hard day, every struggle, every moment of doubt, because it all led here, to this life we built together." Quinton kissed her there in the meadow where their story began, surrounded by wild country and endless sky. Below them, their ranch spread out in the valley, their home and legacy, evidence of what two people could create when they chose to face the world together instead of alone. They had 3 more children over the years, another daughter in 1892, twin boys in 1895. The house expanded again to accommodate them all. Samuel grew up to be a natural rancher, while Grace showed her mother's gift for managing the business side. The younger children were still finding their way, but each showed the strength and determination of both parents. The Rockland Cattle Company eventually collapsed under the weight of its own corruption, the owners arrested for fraud and theft. The land was sold to smaller operators, men who had no interest in harassing their neighbors. Peace finally came to the valley, and the York Ranch thrived in that peace. Caroline and Quinton grew older together, their faces lined by weather and work and laughter, their bodies marked by the demands of ranching life. But their love never diminished. If anything, it grew stronger with each passing year, deepened by shared experience and unwavering partnership. On their 25th anniversary, surrounded by children and grandchildren, Quinton raised a glass in toast. "To my wife," he said, "who faced wolves with courage, who built this ranch with her own 2 hands, who gave me a family and a purpose and a life beyond my wildest dreams. Everything I am, everything we have, started the night I rode into that meadow and met the bravest woman in Colorado." "And to my husband," Caroline replied, her eyes bright with tears, "who appeared when I needed him most, who saw me as an equal, who has been my partner in every way for 25 years. You kept your word, Quinton York. You proved that no one should face danger solo, and you made sure I never had to face anything alone again." Their children and grandchildren cheered, but Caroline and Quinton only had eyes for each other, remembering that first night, those first moments when everything changed. They had taken a chance on a connection that seemed impossible, had trusted feelings that defied logic, and had built something that would outlast them both. Years later, when Caroline was 70 and Quinton 71, they would still ride up to that meadow together when the weather allowed. Their children ran the ranch now, having grown into capable adults who honored the legacy their parents had created. Samuel managed the day-to-day operations with his wife, while Grace handled the finances and business relationships. The younger children had their own roles, and the ranch employed a dozen hands year-round. Caroline and Quinton had earned their rest, but they were not content to simply sit idle. They still worked when their aging bodies allowed, still offered advice when asked, still took joy in seeing the dream they had built continuing into a new generation. One September evening, nearly 40 years after they met, Caroline and Quinton sat on the porch of their home watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and rose. Quinton held Caroline's hand, their fingers interlaced in a gesture so familiar it was unconscious. "Do you ever wonder how different our lives would have been if I had not ridden into that meadow that night?" Quinton asked. Caroline considered. "Sometimes," she admitted. "I think I would have survived the wolves. I was young and stubborn and determined. But I would have lost some sheep, maybe gotten injured. I would have gone home and continued living the life I had always known, helping my father, growing older, probably dying a spinster because I never met anyone who understood me." She squeezed his hand. "But I did not have to live that life. Because you came. You saw me, you chose me, and together we built something neither of us could have created alone." "I was so scared that night," Quinton confessed. "Not of the wolves. I was scared I would say the wrong thing, that you would send me away, that I would lose the chance to know you. When you agreed to let me help, when you trusted me, I felt like I had been given something precious. I knew I could not waste it." "You never did," Caroline assured him. "Not for a single day in 40 years. You have been exactly the partner I needed, Quinton. You have made my life so much richer than I ever imagined possible." They sat in comfortable silence, watching as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. Inside the house, they could hear their grandchildren playing, Samuel's voice calling them to dinner. Life continued, spinning forward into a future they had helped create. "I love you, Caroline York," Quinton said, using the name that had been hers for 4 decades. "More today than yesterday, more tomorrow than today. Until my last breath I will love you." "And I love you, Quinton York," Caroline replied. "My partner, my best friend, the father of my children, the man who kept me from facing danger solo, and then made sure I never had to face anything alone again. Forever." They rose stiffly, bodies protesting in ways that had not been an issue 40 years ago, and walked inside together to join their family. The house was full of noise and laughter and love. 3 generations gathered under one roof, all existing because 2 people had taken a chance on each other in a mountain meadow under threatening skies. That night, lying in bed with Quinton's arms around her, Caroline reflected on the strange and winding path her life had taken. She had set out alone to herd sheep through wolf country, terrified but determined. She had met a cowboy who changed everything. Together, they had built a life that exceeded her wildest dreams. She had been so young then, so certain she knew what she wanted but so wrong about how to achieve it. She had thought she needed to do everything alone, that asking for help was weakness, that depending on someone else would diminish her somehow. Quinton had taught her that partnership was not weakness but strength multiplied, that 2 people working together could accomplish what neither could alone, that love was not a cage but wings that let you fly higher than you ever could solo. The wolves that had threatened her that long ago night had been a danger she could see, snarling and violent and immediate. But the greater danger had been the path she was on, the lonely, isolated future that stretched before her. Quinton had saved her from both kinds of danger, and in doing so had saved himself as well. They had faced so many challenges over the years: financial struggles, harsh weather, difficult births, the loss of loved ones, the endless demands of ranching life. But they had faced all of it together, and that had made all the difference. When Caroline had been weak, Quinton had been strong. When Quinton had doubted, Caroline had believed. They had taken turns carrying each other, and somehow they had both made it through. Now, in the twilight of their lives, Caroline could look back with satisfaction and pride. They had raised 6 children who were good, capable people. They had built a ranch that would provide for generations. They had created a love story that would be told by their grandchildren and great-grandchildren. a testament to what two people could build when they chose each other, despite impossible odds. Caroline drifted toward sleep with Quinton's breathing steady and warm against her neck, his arms still holding her close, even in unconsciousness. She smiled in the darkness, remembering a younger version of herself standing terrified among her sheep, watching yellow eyes gleam in the gathering night. She wished she could speak to that frightened young woman, could tell her that everything was going to work out better than she could possibly imagine. But perhaps that younger Caroline had known on some level. Perhaps that was why she had trusted a stranger who appeared out of the darkness offering help. Perhaps she had recognized, even then, that Quinton York was the answer to every question she had been too afraid to ask. The wolves had taught her that she was brave but not invincible. Quinton had taught her that asking for help was not surrender but wisdom, that facing danger together was not only safer but more meaningful, that love was the greatest adventure of all. No one should face danger solo. Those had been his first words to her, and they had proven to be the truest words anyone had ever spoken. Life was full of dangers, some as obvious as wolf packs, others as subtle as loneliness and despair. But with the right partner, you could face anything. With love and trust and mutual respect, two people could build something that would outlast them both. Caroline fell asleep grateful for every moment, every challenge, every joy. She had lived a good life, a full life, a life that mattered. And it had all started in a meadow at sunset, when a cowboy kept his word and proved that heroism was not about fighting alone but about making sure no one had to. Years passed, and eventually time caught up with both of them. Quinton died peacefully in his sleep at 78, after a long and fulfilling life. Caroline held his hand as he took his last breath, and though her heart broke, she was grateful he did not suffer. She lived 3 more years without him, those years marked by loneliness but also by pride in what they had built together. She watched their grandchildren grow, met her first great-grandchildren, and knew that their legacy would continue long after she was gone. When Caroline finally joined Quinton in 1920, she was laid to rest beside him in the family plot on a hill overlooking the ranch. The headstone was simple: Caroline and Quinton York, beloved parents and grandparents, partners in life and love. But beneath those words, their children had added one more line. They faced everything together and built a legacy that lives on. The ranch continued to prosper under Samuel's management and eventually passed to his children. The story of how Caroline and Quinton met became family legend, told and retold at gatherings and celebrations. The meadow where they first encountered each other was preserved as part of the ranch, a reminder of where it all began. In that meadow, where wolves once hunted and a young woman stood alone and afraid, wildflowers now grew in profusion each summer. The sheep still grazed there, their bells making soft music in the mountain air. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the light was just right, ranch hands swore they could see 2 figures on horseback, riding together across the high grass, partners still even in memory. The story of Caroline Reeves and Quinton York became more than just family history. It was told in the valley as an example of how love could bloom in unexpected places, how courage could come in many forms, how 2 people choosing each other could change not just their own lives, but the lives of everyone who came after. Their great-great-grandchildren still worked the ranch in the 21st century, raising cattle and sheep on land their ancestors had claimed. The original cabin was preserved as a historical site, and visitors came from across the country to hear the story of the woman who herded sheep alone through wolf country, and the cowboy who said no one should face danger solo. It was a story about partnership and courage, about love found in unlikely circumstances, about building something that lasted. It was a story that proved the old saying that behind every successful person was a partner who believed in them. But more than that, it was a story about two people who saw each other truly, who respected and valued each other equally, who built not just a ranch but a legacy of love that time could not diminish. Caroline had been afraid the night the wolves found her flock. But that fear had led to the greatest adventure of her life. Sometimes the things that terrify us are actually doorways to everything we have been searching for. Sometimes the danger we face alone is meant to teach us that we were never meant to be alone at all. No one should face danger solo. Quinton had meant those words literally that night, offering his rifle and his courage against the wolf pack. But they proved to be philosophy for a lifetime, a truth that shaped every day of their marriage. They had faced financial struggles together, child-rearing challenges together, loss and grief and joy together. Neither had ever been alone again after that first meeting, and that partnership had made all the difference. The story ended as all stories must, but the legacy lived on. In the ranch that still bore the York name, in the descendants who carried their blood and their values forward into new generations, in the example they set of what love could be when two people truly saw each other, respected each other, and chose each other every single day. And perhaps in some way that transcended time and death, Caroline and Quinton were still together, still partners, still facing whatever came next side by side. Because true partnership, true love, true recognition of another soul does not end with death. It echoes forward, creating ripples that spread out infinitely, touching lives that would never know the original stone that made them in the end. That was the real magic of their story. Not that a cowboy rescued a woman from wolves, though that was dramatic enough. But that two people found each other against all odds, recognized something essential in each other, and built a life that proved love was not just a feeling but an action, repeated daily through decades of partnership. They showed that happy endings were not fairy tales but the natural result of two people doing the work, keeping their promises, and facing every challenge together with courage and grace. Their story was complete, rounded and full, with no loose ends or unresolved questions. They had lived well, loved deeply, raised good children, built something lasting, and died knowing their lives had mattered. It was everything anyone could hope for and more than most achieved. And it all started with wolves and sheep, and a woman alone and a cowboy who understood that the greatest strength was not in facing danger alone, but in making sure no one had to.